And welcome in to Tennessee Tuesday. On this Tuesday evening, it's August the 18th. I'm John Blankenship, your host of the program tonight, a special edition of Tennessee Tuesday. As I told you last week, and me and Jason said during the show that we would both be off live tonight, but we would have a special edition of the program tonight. And our guest this evening will be a re-airing of the interview we had with Mr. Jeb Smith back earlier this year. We're going to replay that interview tonight for you and talk about his book coming up here in just a few minutes. But a couple of things we do want to mention tonight before we get you into the re-airing of that program. So just a reminder that tonight's edition is a pre-recorded broadcast, and we'll be back with you live next week. And Jason will return with me, and we will have another show. So this is officially season 3 and episode 4 tonight. So thank you for being with us here at Tennessee Tuesday. A couple of things we want to go ahead and mention in division news and things happening around the area. One of these we mentioned, of course, last week during the program. Coming up this Saturday, August the 22nd, is going to be the Storytelling Festival. This will be at the Sam Davis Home and Museum in Smyrna. It's coming up this Saturday, August the 22nd, from 10 until 4. It's going to be a good day with food. There'll be different vendors set up. Cash prizes will be awarded. And I believe they're still looking for a few storytellers. So if you're interested, you can visit the Sam Davis Home and Museum on Facebook, and you can reach out to them there, of course, at the office. And they'll tell you all the details about the Storytelling Festival, which is coming up this weekend at the Sam Davis Home Museum. That's going to be a great event. So if you're looking for something to do coming up at this Saturday, I encourage you to be a part of that program. Well, as we get started tonight, as always, let's give you our disclaimer that the views and opinions that you hear on this broadcast are solely our own and not those of the SCV. It's GEC or any divisions, camps, or brigades, or etc. It's solely our own opinion that we give during this broadcast each week. And we do thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you enjoy these programs. Always a lot of fun to put on and put together. And we do thank you for watching and supporting this program. Just a reminder once again that this is a pre-recorded edition of Tennessee Tuesday, and me and Jason will be back live with you next week. Also, a couple of other things that we do want to mention. The Wilson County State Fair has been going on, which continues through August the 22nd. The General Hatton Camp in Lebanon, number 723, has been there with a recruitment booth. I already see some of the photographs that they've had, and I know they've been working that well in the heat in Lebanon, but to recruit folks for the SCV, and a good job there. Commander Tom Wood doing a fantastic job leading that camp and leading their event there at the Wilson County, Tennessee State Fair. That's going on also through this Saturday. One more event we do want to mention, the Bradford Rose Camp and also the Sam Davis UDC will be hosting a picnic. This will be coming up on September the 19th at 4 o'clock. That will be at the General Lawn Street Museum in Russellville, just outside Morristown. So that's going to be a good event. And if you'd like to know more, you can reach out to them on Facebook and find out all the details. And that's coming up on September the 19th. So there's a few events as we get this program started this week, the special pre-recorded edition. And remember, our guest tonight coming up in just a few minutes, we're going to re-air that interview we had with Mr. Jeb Smith and talk about his books coming up in just a little while. Also, to remind you, if you have an event you would like to send us, something happening in the Tennessee division or across the state or across the South for that matter, an event your SCV camp has been hosting or a history-related event, and you have photographs of it and you'd like to share those with us with details or a project you've been working on, you can email the details to us, Tennessee Tuesday Podcast at gmail.com, or reach out to me or Jason Boshears on Facebook, and we'll be happy to get that information shared with our viewers and encourage you to do so. Also, if you'd like to be a guest on an upcoming episode, maybe there's something your camp is working on, you've got coming up, or a project you've completed and would like to tell us about it, or maybe you have a regular history presentation you would like to give. We've had many of those in the past, and would encourage you to reach out to us. Again, Tennessee Tuesday Podcast at gmail.com, or reach out to Jason or myself, and we'd like to get you scheduled in the next few weeks and get you on the program coming up here on Tennessee Tuesday. You can also watch past episodes of our show by visiting our website, which is TennesseeTuesday.com. Well, there's a few news events that we have for you on this special edition of Tennessee Tuesday, and we're going to go ahead and take a break, and then we'll be coming back and we'll re-air that interview we had earlier this year with Mr. Jeb Smith on the broadcast right after this. But we do need to tell you about our sponsors. We thank all of them for making it possible. Without these folks, you wouldn't be able to have such programs as Tennessee Tuesday and all of the SCB Chat Network. These folks that you see at the bottom of the screen make it possible. If you'd like to consider becoming a sponsor and a supporter of the broadcast, there's many different levels that you can do so. All you have to do is visit scvchat.com. There you'll find all the details of how you can become a Patreon supporter. There's low levels all the way to higher levels, and then we get into the monthly sponsorships as well. In between there's opportunity for you to get merchandise, as you've heard Jason tell you about in our different broadcasts. Again, thanks to our sponsors for making Tennessee Tuesday and SCV Chat possible. We couldn't do it without these fine folks. And again, if you would like to know more, reach out to us. We would love to get you here on the program as one of the sponsors. It helps. Again, it's not free to do this. The software we use, of course, the equipment that's used, all cost funds just to make this happen and continue to grow this network. And we need your help, and you can be a sponsor here of the broadcast. So thank you so much to all of our sponsors tonight. And now let's tell you about our regular show sponsors. One of those being Dr. Chris Cummings, Modern Medicine and Southern Hospitality. His website is cmc-md.org. Of course, Dr. Cummings is based in Oxford, Mississippi, and he is treating knee pain. So if you're dealing with that, you need to go see Dr. Cummings. You could reach out to him to schedule an appointment, 978-444-2273. Also, one of our sponsors tonight, each and every week, is 31stRegEngraving.com. 31st Regiment Engraving. You see some of the products they have over there. The flask at the top. You've got the keppies. You've got the coins. You see some earrings there as well. And, of course, the bracelets. I know Moose from SCB Chat, he wears one of those bracelets with his ancestor's name on it. You can reach out to Todd at 31stRegEngraving.com. Also sponsoring the show tonight, of course, is Larry McClooney and booksbylarry.com. His most recent book that he has authored is Paradox of Freedom, A History of Black Slaveholders in America. This is an excellent book. A lot of research has gone into this, and we had Larry on the program a few months back to talk about it and his other books. And if you'd like to keep updated with all the books that Larry has, and you can purchase copies of those, visit booksbylarry.com. Also, Beauregard's Taylor is a sponsor of our broadcast, a family-driven business proudly offering authentic War Between the States reproductions. They have T-shirts, they have flags. They do a great job on their flags, and I'm sure you've seen many of the work on flags that they have done. Just wonderful flags. Got to see some of those at National Reunion. Also, the lapel pins and more. You can reach out and visit their website to learn more about all the products that they can make and how they can help you. Beauregard'sTaylor.shop. Also sponsoring our program each and every week is the museum at Market Hall since 1899 in Charleston, South Carolina. A great museum that you need to go to tour when you're in South Carolina. They're open Thursday through Sunday from 11 until 4. Also check out them on social media, and they have a gift shop as well. The museum at Market Hall, one of our sponsors here also on Tennessee Tuesday. And finally, tonight, the Sam Davis Home and Museum sponsors our program each week. If you've never been to Smyrna, you need to make your plans to go. And this weekend would be a great time with the Storytelling Festival going on. Plus, you can tour the home and the museum there and visit the final resting place of the boy hero of the Confederacy, Sam Davis. This is in Smyrna. You can learn more about how you can visit and plan your visit there, as well as become a member of the Memorial Association, going to samdavishome.org. And thanks again to the Sam Davis Home and Museum being one of our sponsors here on Tennessee Tuesday. We're going to go ahead and take this break. We'll be right back after this, and we'll be telling you more about things happening in the SCV and our special guest tonight, and a re-air interview that we had back earlier this year with Jeb Smith. That's coming up next on Tennessee Tuesday in this special pre-recorded edition of the show. Remember, we'll be back live with you next week, and that interview with Jeb Smith is coming up next.
Was your great-grandfather a traitor or a patriot? Today's politically correct are trying hard to take away the heritage of the brave Confederate soldiers who fought and died for their land. But one thing is certain, they can't change history. Those Confederate soldiers were fighting for the same reason soldiers fight today. They were fighting against homeland invasion. We believe that the desecration of the bravery, patriotism, and honor of those men should not be allowed. They were outmanned and outsupplied, but they were never outfought. They were proud men who believed in fighting to protect their dignity, their homes, and their families. If you're the male descendant of a Confederate soldier, we'd welcome you to join with us in the preservation of that heritage. We're the Sons of Confederate Veterans. Check us out on the internet at scv.org or call us at 800-MY-SOUTH. That's 800-697-6884. Sons of Confederate Veterans, dedicated to preserving the reputation of men like Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, and your great-grandfather.
Major James Daniel Richardson, 1843 to 1914. Major Richardson of Rutherford County, Tennessee, was a Confederate veteran, statesman, and historian whose life reflected both service and leadership. During the war between the states, Richardson left his studies to join the Confederate Army, serving nearly 4 years with the 45th Tennessee Infantry, rising from private to adjutant and officer. He was wounded during the Atlanta campaign, carrying the effects of that service for the rest of his life. After the war, he returned home to build a distinguished career in law and public service. Richardson served in both houses of the Tennessee General Assembly before representing Tennessee in the U.S. Congress for 2 decades, eventually becoming House Minority Leader. He also became a noted historian, compiling the messages and papers of the Confederacy and preserving important records of Southern history for future generations. Remembered as a devoted Tennessean, Richardson's life stands as a lasting example of service to his state, his people, and his heritage. To learn more historical facts about Confederate veterans, visit TennesseeSCV.org. And welcome back into Tennessee Tuesday on this special edition of our broadcast. It is Tuesday, August the 18th, and this is a special pre-recorded edition of the program. We do thank you for watching tonight, and we're going to re-air an interview that we had earlier this year with Mr. Jeb Smith, an author and SCV member. This is a very interesting broadcast tonight. I had a lot of great comments to that. We want to replay that for you tonight, as me and Jason both needed to be off this evening, but we promised you we would have a program for you tonight, and we'll be live back again with you next week. Now, right now, let's re-air that interview that we had with Mr. Jeb Smith here on Tennessee Tuesday. Jeb Smith is our guest. He's an author and historian. He has officially 3 books to his name, and he's working on some new books, and we'll be talking about all of those, but specifically Defending Dixie's Land tonight is going to be our topic. We'll be talking about that book, and Jeb, welcome in this evening.
Thank you for having me on.
Glad to have you tonight. And as we're going to kind of kick off in this segment, we want to learn a little bit about who is Jeb Smith and kind of how you got interested in history and even writing books. So tell me a little bit about who you are tonight.
Yeah, well, I'm Jeb Smith. I've lived in Vermont my entire life. I've always been a bit of a history buff. I'd say the military aspects of the war really created that interest in the Civil War as I grew up. And I always admired Stonewall Jackson and Robert E. Lee in the South because they were fighting against these larger, better equipped armies that were invading their territories. And one thing that caught my interest was how aggressive Lee and Stonewall Jackson, Nathan Bedford Forrest, some of these Southern soldiers, that they didn't care that they were outnumbered. They wanted to take the fight to the enemy. And so that always just captivated me and created my interest in the Civil War as a whole. And as far as history, there's always been 2 interests of mine, is the Middle Ages and the American Civil War. And, as I researched later on, I figured there's a lot of similarities and there's reasons why I'm sympathetic to the South and to the Middle Ages, because there are certain similarities in those 2. And writing the books on my interest is really, just having that huge interest and finding out things that I was taught were not actually how it was. And that makes me want to as I'm digging into all the sources and reading all the histories, I want to share that information with other people. When I first became a Christian, the same thing happened. I wanted to share all this information because you're fed this secular viewpoint in education, and I was an atheist. And when I found out I had been misled and I lived my life a certain way based on a lie, it angers me, and it makes me want to, kind of set other people free and share the information that I learned with them. Well, the same thing happens with history as well. I felt history's been distorted and we weren't taught the whole truth. So I wanted to share that with other people as well.
And Jeb, that's a really good way to look at it as you became a Christian and you see that. I know that same feeling. You want to tell everybody what's happened in your life. And as in history, when you learn something new like this, and especially I've been through it, you've been through it, and we'll talk a little bit about where you're from here in just a moment, but different viewpoints, even growing up in the South, living here, what you're writing about and we'll be talking about tonight, and what we know, what we were taught in school wasn't always correct. We maybe got a little bit of truth, but not all of it. And that happened all over the country. And this book is going to kind of talk about that. And we'll be breaking that down in just a little bit. But as we're talking there, again, you're raised up north. So yeah. This is kind of unusual to some folks to really reach out and see, hey, what I've been taught in school wasn't exactly right.
Right. The deep north, too, in New England, as Brian McClanahan calls it. But yeah, I was interviewed last week, I believe, with Manifest History. And I mentioned how it's the whole society. It's not just the textbooks. I'll talk to my uncles, talk to teachers, talk to parents, talk to family members, go to the library, the politicians, the newspaper. Everyone is telling the same story, as I said. And they're not even doing it on purpose. Like my uncle had no intention of demonizing the South.
It's just what he's been taught along the way. That's real. And I think you broke up a little bit on us there, Jeb. We dropped out on some of what you said. But again, you were mentioning your uncle there, not really he's not intentionally telling something wrong. Right. It's been what's been taught to him, what he's learned in his life, because we're so many generations out from this now.
Right. Yeah, because it only takes one generation to spread a lie. You mislead one generation and they'll just pass it on unknowingly down the line to the next, to the next, to the next. You mentioned how in the South they teach a biased history as well, and that's absolutely true. I was talking with someone on X. He made a comment and he said, I'm from the South and I know the South is wrong. The Confederacy's bad. The North was the good guy. And I pointed out, I said, you may be geographically from the South, but you're from the reconstructed South. There's not the old South that you grew up in. It's not the same culture. You're not taught the same things. So you may be from the South, from a Southern state, but it's definitely not it's a biased history that you're learning down there as well.
And it's something, Joe, I've growing up in a Southern family. I knew I had Confederate ancestors, but until I was grown, when I really got into my passion into history, learned more about that. Now, were we always ones that we didn't have battle flags hanging on the walls at home? But I mean, I knew of it. We weren't scared of it, but it was still, well, we had ancestors that fought for the South, but the North was doing the right thing. Yeah. That still was there. We had a little bit of it, but it's so many generations out again. It had been changed. So this book, and we're going to talk about that in just a little bit, what this book is about and kind of how it breaks this stuff down tonight. But Jeb, tell more folks. I know you're in Vermont, right?
Yep, Vermont. Yep.
So are you born and raised there? How did you make your way?
Born and raised, Rutland County, Vermont, southern, rural county of Vermont. It's beautiful landscape. It avoids a lot of the cities. There's a lot to love about Vermont. At the same time, it's the most liberal, the most secular. It's hard to imagine a place that'd be more anti-South than Vermont. Probably Massachusetts.
Oh, wow.
I would think Vermont and Massachusetts, if I had to guess, the bias against Southern, especially Southern whites in Vermont is it's accepted, it's ingrained, and that's where I'm from. But there is a lot to love about this state as well.
I mean, it's a beautiful state. I've never got to try. I've been as far as Philadelphia and up in that area, but have never made it up to Vermont. But I hear it's a really beautiful state.
It is indeed.
Well, as we're going to get ready to take our first break coming up in just a few minutes to talk more about the book. But Jeb, tell me a little bit about how did you get into writing? How have you been writing your whole life and then finally say, hey, I'm going to write a full book? How did that come out?
Yeah, I've not been a writer. It really happened during COVID. I had a lot of time off to kind of do what I wanted to do. And I was basically full-time researching and reading. And I had all these notes and arguments. By then I'd gotten into the Civil War, and I'd just debated on forums more for fun. And so I had a bunch of time off, and my brother produced a board game. And it got me thinking, what would I like to do? And it's like, well, I'd love to write a book on the Civil War. And during COVID, a bunch of universities opened up their libraries, and they had, so you could access them online. And I found all these original sources mixed in with the hundreds of books that I've read. And I said, now I feel like I have the material, I can throw it together and actually write a book. And so it was my first book. I self-published it, and then Shotwell picked it up, and I kind of just caught the bug, as my father says, and haven't been able to stop, whether it's articles or books or what have you. I just keep writing, I keep reading. I've kind of fallen in love. I've learned a lot about myself through writing, through arguing, through debating, and it's just been an awesome journey, I guess.
We'll talk about a little bit about, of course, profession. We've talked before that I'm a library director here in West Tennessee. What is your writing style? Do you follow after anybody? How did you develop that? You've got the information, you've researched it. How did you put it into a book form and learn to write? Is that something you'd kind of always messed with a little bit, or did it all come at one time?
Not at all. I'd say, obviously subconsciously, just from the books and the authors you read are going to influence you in the way you put it together. I'd say it's actually, the way I write is kind of a debate. I feel like everything's kind of a response to an argument or something that I believe that is a misconception that's not true. And then I'm arguing against it, almost like a lawyer. I've had a lot of people who've read my book say, you should be a lawyer, or you argue like a lawyer. And I think that's really how I write. It's kind of like almost like a court case, and where you kind of present your evidence and you make your arguments. And originally the intention was to kind of section the book in a way that people who read it can then go use that material as well. That was something that was intentional, that I wanted to go back to the original sources, allow them to read the time period sources. Don't listen to Jeb. Don't listen to what I have to say. Listen to what people said in 1860, what the Southerners were saying. And I kind of tried to present their viewpoint as best I could. So I wouldn't say there's a specific style to my writing.
Do you have a favorite author that you like to read? Are you a big reader outside of writing? Because in the library world, I meet people that write that say they really don't read that much.
That's the thing. I don't actually enjoy reading that much. I do it for research. I do it for knowledge. And that's what drives me to read. So I was reading, when I'm studying slavery, it's not the favorite, it's not your preferred topic. I would rather not read about slavery. But in doing so, I remember saying, I'm going through this 1,000-page book on slavery that I'm really not interested through, but I'm driving right through it because I want the knowledge, I want the information to pull from that. So that's definitely my motivator. I'm a J.R. Tolkien fan. The Bible is really the first book that I read from cover to cover. And that probably started my interest.
Well, it's going to be a very interesting topic tonight. I think you broke up a little bit on us again there. I know your Wi-Fi signal may not be the best, but
I can relocate here.
Here in our next break, I think you're going to move around a little bit. But let's go ahead and take our first break. Jeb Smith is our guest tonight. He is the author of Defending Dixie's Land. We'll be talking about that book, what it's all about, and break that down for you with some good conversation coming up after our first break. So, Jeb, if you'll stay with us, we'll be right back here in just a moment. Samuel R. Watkins, 1839 to 1901. Sam Watkins of Murray County, Tennessee, is remembered as one of the most well-known Confederate soldiers through his service and his words. Enlisting as a private in Company H, 1st Tennessee Infantry, Watkins served throughout the war between the states, fighting in many of its hardest battles, including Shiloh, Chickamauga, and Franklin. Like so many soldiers, he endured the hardships of war, witnessing both the courage and the cost of conflict firsthand. After the war, Watkins returned home and later wrote his memoir, Company H, one of the most widely read personal accounts of a Confederate soldier. His writings provide a vivid and human perspective on the everyday experiences of those who served. Today, Sam Watkins is remembered not only for his military service, but for preserving the story of the common Confederate soldier for future generations. To learn more historical facts about Confederate veterans, visit TennesseeSCV.org.
When my mother was in college, she danced with Confederate veterans. to me, it wasn't that far away. You know, my father knew this. My mother knew this. Almost 50 years ago, I joined the Sons of Confederate Veterans. In those days, we weren't concerned about saving monuments or any of those things. That wasn't necessary. In fact, none of us had any remote idea that it would ever come up. We can't just sit there and react. We have to be proactive. Or, as Robert E. Lee said, the best way to disrupt your enemy's plans is to strike first. Everyone should do all in his power to collect and disseminate the truth, in the hope that it may find a place in history and descend to posterity. History is not the relation of campaigns and battles and generals or other individuals, but that which shows the principles for which the South contended and which justified her struggle for those principles. If you're looking for some place to be where you think you're going to accomplish something to save our history, go to the Sons of Confederate Veterans. I'm Thomas Lee Jesse. I'm a descendant of Private Daughtery Gilmer, a Confederate veteran.
Welcome back into the show. Jeb Smith is our guest tonight. He is repositioned there, and we'll hope for better Wi-Fi this evening. And Jeb, we're both having a little issue tonight as I've made some changes in my studio, and I've a nice mixer here that I've been using for about 2 years. Great product. And this morning it decided for my radio show that it was going to have connectivity issues, and it's still having some issues tonight. So my setup is not the same as it normally is. So those things happen from time to time, but we're bearing with them. And again, we're glad to have you tonight. And we've been talking about the book, Defending Dixie's Land, and we're going to break that down a little bit. And first, Jeb, let me ask you, folks that are probably going to see this book, they'll say, well, I don't see Jeb Smith's name on it. I see the name of Isaac C. Bishop. So first, let's tell folks, who is Isaac C. Bishop?
Isaac C. Bishop was a pen name that I kind of just came up with in my stepmom as well. We kind of mixed some family names, and Isaac is actually my son's name. And so we kind of threw it together. And I used the pen name because I have four children, and two of them were at the local public school at the time. Two were homeschooled. And I was worried about how it'd affect them if their teachers or certain friends found out that their dad had wrote a book defending the South or the Confederacy, because immediately in Vermont, that means you're racist, you're evil, all these things. I didn't want to affect any friendships they had or relationships with teachers that would negatively affect them. And so that's the reason I used the pen name. And David Daniels found out later on recently that I actually have a very distant ancestor who fought for the Virginia 20th Regiment, I believe it was, named Isaac C. Bishop. So, that kind of just blew my mind. And this next book I actually dedicated to that private for defending Virginia against the invaders. And so that was incredible to find out. But yeah, my name is Jeb Smith, and David Daniels also found out that I'm now a member of the Sons of Confederate Veterans in Gainesville, Tennessee. And so I'm a sixth generation descendant from John Hunts Morgan, the Alabama cavalry general. And also one more generation, I think, one or two more distant from Robert E. Lee, Nathan Bedford Forrest, and Isaac C. Bishop as well. So that was all. I thought there's no way that he was going to be able to find any ancestors. As I mentioned to you, I did a talk in Alabama, and they're like, "Oh, let us find you a way into the Sons of Confederate Veterans. We'll find you an ancestor." I said, "It's not going to happen." My whole family, we came from Ireland, and they're all Massachusetts, and some in Canada. I said, I have no ancestors. It's not even worth trying. And David Daniels contacted me on Facebook, and he was very persistent. And I said, whatever, you're not going to find anyone, but if you want to waste your time, go ahead. And of course, he came up with all these ancestors. It didn't take him long at all, and just blew my mind, of course. And I still need to read biographies on Hunts Morgan because I haven't yet, but it's on my list to read.
Well, we're glad to have you a member. I know that's exciting, especially somebody like you that was raised up north. You think there's no chance that that's ever going to happen, but it shows how many the descendants are that have Confederate ancestry. I mean, in the millions. I know there was a magic number somebody said recently, and I don't remember what it was, how many millions of people that have that are descended from Confederate soldiers, and you're one of those, even though it's a little distant, but you still have that Confederate blood. And you find this out. Did you find this out after you have written the book?
Oh, yeah. This was very recently, in the past maybe 3 or 4 months, I believe. So, yeah, the book had already been out for a long time. And like I said, I was made a friend of the Alabama division of the Sons of Confederate Veterans, and they asked me down there. I said, it's not going to happen. And again, Facebook, David Daniels made it happen. Everyone's told me he's the guy to go to.
He will do it. Well, we're glad to have you a member in the Tennessee division. And again, let's talk a little bit about the book tonight, Defending Dixie's Land, What Every American Should Know About the South and the Civil War. Now, I just downloaded, Jeb, a copy of this book last night that I've purchased. I haven't got to read it yet, so I'm anxious to do it. So I'm learning along tonight as what you tell us about the book. And let's kind of just break it down first. A little bit about, we've talked a little bit before the break, the inspiration behind this. You hadn't always heard truth. What got you started to come up with this topic that you researched, and then when did you get to the point, hey, I need to write a book about this?
That's tough, because as I said, when I started figuring all this stuff out, it really was to debate online, and that's what I was doing. And there's a couple moments that switch. I'd say when I started investigating the slave narratives, when I started researching what slavery was like, and I started reading books that were written from before the Civil War, often by Northern authors or European authors, and as well as reading hundreds of, well, really, I read thousands of interviews with former slaves. And I said, this is nothing like, what we'd been taught growing up in Vermont or anywhere in the United States. And that was definitely one of the moments where I thought I have to get this information out there. Walter and Donald Kennedy wrote The South Was Right. And that book, that book really hit me hard, because everything I read was opposite of what I've been told, what I thought was true. And it's not that it converted me, but it got me, I have to know if something's true. Have I been lied to? I can't move on.
At the same time, when you probably read that, you want to say, well, are they telling the truth as well? What are you missing here?
I knew there was two sides to the story, and I wanted to figure out who was true. And as I dug deeper and deeper into it, and as I said, when COVID happened, a bunch of time opened up, universities opened up their libraries. That's where I really said, okay, maybe I can do something and throw this together as a book.
Well, let's talk a little bit now what the book is about for folks that are joining in. Maybe they've seen it shared on social media. Tell me about the book. I know we're talking about these truths. So kind of break it down. What is this book about?
It's my attempt at defending the South as a whole, basically all the major subjects that I felt we'd been misled about. And it was really directed at Vermonters. And I've had a lot of Northern readers read it and told me it's completely changed their perspective of the war, of American history, and more. And so it's been great. It's really looking at all the lies that I felt we were taught in Vermont, and then taking them, responding to them one at a time, from slavery, the causes of the war, Lincoln, and more. And it was just my whole attempt at defending the South. And I felt like they don't have a defense, at least here in Vermont. No one's advocating for them, I guess you'd say, or defending them against the attacks against them and the lies. And so I wanted to be that person and be like, hey, look, we're not right about everything, that we've been misled, and there is a justifiable defense of the South in the Civil War.
How is your response? You mentioned really wanting to get it to Vermont first. How has the response been after it's been out a couple of years now? Response being to it?
In Vermont, it really had, North as a whole, I'm talking about responders. I haven't done much locally to promote it. I'm going to, especially with this upcoming book. I'm going to look at doing some debates and things like that, and writing in. I write opinion pieces to the local newspapers and things like that. And I kind of wait for an opportunity to arise. I've written about some of my other books, and this one is, of course, more controversial, but now my kids are either graduated or in a private Christian school, and next year they'll be homeschooled. So I kind of feel like I have the leeway to kind of just say what I want now. So I'm kind of just entering into that position, and I feel confident of being able to do that. And so I haven't done a whole lot in Vermont. The only people I've talked to in Vermont are friends and family. And so it's been well received among them. Obviously, they're kind of biased towards me. They also know me well, so they don't have those preconceived assumptions about a writer who would defend the South, that he's racist and all these other things. And so it's been received very well in that small group in Vermont.
Well, it looks like there's 10 chapters to it, and you mentioned here a little bit on how you break down different things. Let's kind of talk through some of those, because I really like how the chapters are named. Of course, as you're looking at the name of the book, Defending Dixie's Land, you think about the very popular song that we all know and sing here in the South. And, of course, that was sung some in the North, too. There were some folks that liked it there as well. But you kind of break the chapters down by lines from the song.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I love that song. I've always loved it. I remember Ken Burns' documentary. It was one of the first documentaries I watched. And Second South Carolina String Band did some of the music. They played Dixie in there. But yeah, when I love Second South Carolina String Band. I don't know if you're familiar with them.
Yeah, they're very good. They're one of the best.
Their version of Dixie is just amazing. I love it. And so, you know, as I was throwing it together and I'm trying to name these chapters and I'm thinking the lyrics from the song, so many of them could fit in since I was titled my book Defending Dixie's Land, it only seemed to make sense to name these chapters after various lines in the song.
Well, let's kind of break down some of the chapters tonight, and then I want to pull a little bit from kind of each one of those, let you highlight a couple of things that where you're defending the South and where the South was right, maybe the stories have been told wrong. You want to kind of pull from some of those and kind of tell what your defense is and there.
Yeah, sure. Look away, politically incorrect information about life of a Southern slave is the first chapter. And that's just basically trying to say that what we've been taught about slavery is very selected. We've gotten information from Frederick Douglass, Booker T. Washington, other runaway slaves who endured the worst of slavery. So everyone knows those names. Everyone studies them in every high school across the United States. We've taken the worst 10-15% of the cases of what slavery is like, and we painted the whole entire South in slavery in that way. And so what I intend to do is kind of cases of what I broke up again.
Yeah, say that part again. You broke
up
about
that. And so I feel like what we've done is taken the worst case scenarios of slavery, and what I attempt to do is kind of show the other end, show the, you know, the 20% most positive cases of slavery, and give it a broader view of what slavery is like, not just the worst, but I try to show the other side. And so what you end up with is these masters and slaves who really have a family-like relationship. A lot of them say they're their best friends. They're their closest intimates. They grew up together. They lived together. They worked together. It wasn't, you know, we're given the perspective of a master who's racist, who whips his slave because he hates black people. And it wasn't like that at all. The slaves were inherited. It was a way of life, and they lived together, and they lived in these close-knit communities, and they were really like extended families. And so I present that in the chapters. Hey, look, this is what we think slavery is like, is a very selective percentage of cases, and we're missing the whole rest of what the whole South was like and what slavery is like, without saying slavery is a positive good.
Yeah, I mean, we still know it was not a good thing, but even I look in West Tennessee here, there's stories in Gibson County. We see how the slaves were involved in the family. They became family. I mean, I know there was a difference, but they still they grew up together. You hear of the ones that went off to war with the master's son. So they did have connections. They grew up together.
Right. And that's basically what I'm doing. And that, like, the work rate, the way they were treated, all that is misportrayed as well. That they're actually, you know, punishments were actually very rarely happen. That, you know, they go to work, they'd say, you know, we worked in the fields or we worked in the house. And when the day's over, they sang, they danced, they drank. They had a lot more freedom. That's one of the things I point out is they didn't have government regulation, especially the ones on the plantation. All they had to do was deal with their master, and they were free of government regulation, taxation, of all these things. They had housing taken care of them, retirement, their food. You'd have certain slaves producing or doing the meals, cleaning out the cabins, doing all that stuff. So they were free of a lot of the chores and obligations that we have today. And they had a lot of holidays, and a lot of their evening was actually spent kind of partying because they didn't have worries in life. They were pretty carefree. A lot of the slaves that I read in the interviews that I quote in the book after slavery, they said we preferred slavery because we didn't have to make money. We didn't have to worry about where the next meal was coming from. We didn't have to worry about the law. We kind of lived in our own way, in our own independent society of these close-knit family and friends amongst the slaves. And they kind of did their routine, and they kind of had, in a lot of ways, a pretty sweet, relaxed deal compared to modern life. And we would never perceive that as we imagine how slavery is taught back in the day. But so many slaves expressed that and said, we were better off in slavery because we actually had more freedom, even though they were technically enslaved. And after, there's all these obligations and things they have to deal with that they didn't have to before.
Well, it makes really good sense. I mean, you start to look at after the war, you get into Reconstruction and how they were kind of on their own at this point. They're free, right. But what does freedom mean? What do you do now?
Right. No medical care. No medical care, no land. They have to fend for themselves. And then you have the racial tension and the politics of Reconstruction and setting white against black and black against white. And it all really went downhill in a lot of ways for many, not for all, obviously. There was certainly horrible situations that getting out is better than anything. But for a large number of the slaves, it wasn't. Emancipation was not this great thing. And a lot of them fought to prevent it from happening.
And you see a lot, and I know here locally, I speak to the things I've researched here, they didn't want to leave. They stayed on the farms. They were there for generations. I mean, right. Even though the whole world changed, but they didn't have anywhere to go. It was home to them.
Yeah, I quoted a lot of northern newspapers and observers as well, saying, the slaves, they don't care if slavery ends or not. They're going to live their life. They're going to stay where they are because that's their family. That's how they've lived. There's no need to change it. They're not unhappy. They're not seeking to run away.
And they don't know anything else. That's right. All they need.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Well, we hear this narrative that's really put to us, Jeb, in the world today that when the states seceded in the South, that it was only over slavery. Do you address that in this book as well? What were some of the reasons for secession?
I do. There was many reasons for secession, economic, political, cultural. I do talk about slavery because slavery was a cause, but as I point out I go into this more detail in my next book, but as I point out, slavery really had three strands of causes. Only one of them was to preserve slavery. But the North, Lincoln and the Republican Party, plank for their party platform, said, we're not touching slavery in the South. We have no legal right to do so. We have no intention to do so. That's what Lincoln said. That's what prominent Republicans and abolitionists throughout the North said. They had no desire to mess with slavery in the states that already existed. They wanted to stop its expansion into the Western territories. And that was by and large to keep blacks out of the Western territories because they wanted it for all white people. A lot of the northern states restricted blacks from entering their states at all. And Abraham Lincoln said, I quote him 2 or 3 times in my book saying, we want these for white people, and we don't want blacks working with whites. We don't want them living with whites or marrying. We don't want them on equality in, these are the all white states, I guess you'd say. And so we want to keep the blacks and slave owners in the South. That's why they didn't want slavery to expand. They didn't want slave owners going out into the West and bringing their blacks with them. That's really the main drive of that.
And that's something you see, and you mentioned Lincoln in there as well, and I'm sure that's a deep discussion to get into there. His viewpoints on the slave and the blacks, and it's not necessarily. And you look at some of the quotes that has been quoted from him. It's not what we've been taught in modern public schools today.
That was maybe, I always say, I think that was the major misconception I grew up with. I thought Lincoln was this abolitionist who wanted to free the blacks. He wanted complete equality. He wanted to end slavery. And none of that is true. So that was really shocking. But back to slavery in the territories. So slavery is protected in the South. Everyone knows this. And you look at someone like William Yancey. He was a fire eater. He was a defender of slavery. He pushed as hard as anyone to extend slavery into the territories, to allow it to expand. But at the same time, in multiple speeches, he says, we know slavery is not going to extend. We know the people of Kansas are going to vote it down. Colorado, Arizona, the terrain is not fit. You can't have cotton plantations. He says, I know, and everyone knows, multiple fire eaters and pro-slavery secessionists said, we know slavery is not going to expand. But at the same time, they fought so diligently to allow slavery to expand. So why would they do that? Well, that's because if you had the federal government, this is one of the slavery issues. And I argue that the primary cause that when slavery was an issue, which is one of many issues, that the primary cause of slavery being an issue is the issue of states' rights. Because what the Republicans want to do was allow the federal government to disallow these territories and states to decide on slavery. And what the South said, well, if you're going to do that, you have to amend, you have to give the federal government the authority to do that. It's not in the Constitution. If you allow the federal government to outlaw slavery in the territories or outlaw slave owners in the territories without that specific delegated power from the states in the Constitution, then you're entering into an authoritarian system where the Constitution no longer matters, states' rights no longer matter, and the federal government can declare whatever it wants. And over in Tennessee, I quote the governor, he said, if you allow the federal government to decide on slavery where it doesn't have authority, what's it to stop it saying it has authority over all your other property or any other area, which is what we have today. The federal government regulates everything in our life pretty much outside of the Constitution. And that's because we originally allowed it to, or we attempted it. Lincoln allowed it to do it in many ways, but that was the issue over slavery in the territories. It was not actually preserving slavery where they knew it wouldn't expand anyway. It's preserving limited government. You can't allow the federal government to interfere on the domestic issues of the states without completely annihilating the Constitution and limited government. And so I have content on that in my book, and I expand more on that in my next book as well. But that is the prominent issue when slavery is an issue. It's not keeping slavery legal in South Carolina or Alabama, where no one is saying they're going to touch it. No one thinks it's going to be outlawed there. It's protected. The Corwin Amendment offered eternal protection in the Constitution. And all the abolitionists said, we're not touching it where it is. The issue's not, William Yancey and these Southern politicians preserving the slaves they have, that they're in fear of losing them. It's the issue over limited government, because states' rights was connected to slavery. It's connected to the Constitution and the Union and limited government. And you can't separate them. And the South had been saying that in their platforms for decades. And it's in their major speeches. It's in the South Carolina Causes of Secession. It's all over the place that the politicians say this. You can't do it without an amendment, or you're annihilating the Constitution.
Jeb, and you kind of touched on that, we kind of see some of these same things today. And we talk about states' rights and this, the federal government maybe overstepping, and these same things keep coming up. And it's some things leaders of the 1860s and afterwards even said these same things would reoccur, and in some way they are.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's really what you can view. All the differences break down into kind of constitutional differences in the viewpoints of government. And one of a strictly regulated, delegated powers to the Constitution by the states is that the Union that we were, which is what the South maintained, or were we going to become this new northern nation where politicians in DC were kind of judge the Constitution and interpret it in a certain ways and decide where they had powers and where they didn't, which would be controlled by whoever's in power, judges or political party? Or is the Constitution itself the authority in the people of the states? And so all the issues, slavery and everything along those lines, really that's what it breaks down to.
Well, one of your chapters in the book there is To Live and Die in Dixie, Black Support for the Confederacy. As we kind of touch on a couple more things before we wrap up tonight, let's talk a little bit about that. Was there support from blacks for the Confederacy? I know we hear some of that talk, and you address that in this book.
Absolutely. And it's like the way where it's presented today is black versus white. The Confederacy is this racist place, and the North is about equality, wants to set the blacks free. But that's a false narrative. And really, it's a homeland thing. The majority in the South defended, as your Sons and Confederate Veterans commercial said, they defend themselves because they were invaded by a foreign enemy. That's why most of the soldiers fought. Well, that's why most of the blacks defended the South as well. That was their homeland as well. There were hundreds of thousands of free blacks throughout the South. Thousands of them were slave owners. You referenced that which is a great read on black slave owners in the South. But the South, it was their homeland as well. They didn't view as, oh, we're these subjugated slaves. They took pride in their plantation a lot of times, and pride in their master. That was their local community, just as it was for whites. So it shouldn't surprise us that they donated to the Confederate cause, to the armies, that they offered their services and labor, that they gave food, they gave money. Some did serve as soldiers. And usually for state militia or with their master. But yeah, it shouldn't surprise us that the blacks in the South, that they love their homeland as well, and were willing to defend it. And so my chapter is all about giving various examples, often from Northern sources or post-war slaves themselves, about Black Confederate soldiers or various ways in which they supported the Confederate cause. A lot of times, I quote in Grant, he had to kick out all the runaway slaves in his camp because so many blacks were coming saying, oh, we're runaway slaves, we're mistreated, our masters are poor to us. They get all this information about the Union Army and then return back to the Confederate soldiers and give them all the good information. And they led to a lot of Union soldiers getting trapped in the middle of nowhere. There's cases where runaway slaves would lead these Union soldiers to go capture these Confederates who were off guard, when really the Confederates had set an ambush, and the slaves led them to the Confederates, and the Confederates would capture the Union soldiers. So they were using that to their advantage because they knew the North thought of all blacks as mistreated, poorly treated slaves that want freedom, when in reality they wanted the South to win. So there's some really great stories in that chapter.
And Jeb, one of the things that stands out to me locally, we have some images of the Confederate reunions here that were held, and there's usually 1 to 2 black men that are in those pictures. And it always has been, even before I really got into Southern history, being a local historian here, you see those images, and it's not something that we're taught about. Like, why was there a black man in that picture? And he's wearing the badges as well. So being sometimes maybe even very simple-minded, I think, well, he must have been well liked by these soldiers. He must have had a connection to them, that he was attending these reunions. And as you've seen, they were well respected.
Right. Yeah. They were treated as equal soldiers. They were paid the same as white soldiers, which the North didn't do. They were an integrated union, or in integrated units, which the North didn't do. I mean, again, it goes back to my chapter on slavery, that whites and blacks were familiar with each other. I remember watching, again, the Ken Burns documentary, which I actually still love. The music, the immersion of it is great. Even though
it's well put together. And I know it's just out on PBS again. I saw tonight before we went on, they've put it up on their YouTube page. And I thought, I'm going to have to go through that again and watch that again.
And they make a big, if you remember, it's the last disc of it. But General Sherman, I guess, shook the hands of a black man. And I think it was in Philadelphia or Washington, D.C. after the war. And everyone's like, oh, this is a new era. Look at black and white together. It's unity and all that. And it was a big deal in the North because it never happened. A bunch of observers said, they're extremely racist in the North. Blacks and whites are kept separate. He said in the South, they interact all the time. And that's why I have a lot of observers and slaves themselves said, you have black and white women holding each other's babies. You have the kids playing together. They're traveling together. They're going to worship together. They live together. So there wasn't that alienation, and they were integrated. And so, of course, when they went to war as soldiers, they were also integrated. It was the North where there were so few blacks and they were segregated and kept separate. That it's a big deal that a black man shakes a white man's hand, where it happened in the South every day, all the time, because it's, they're familiar with each other.
Well, book is sounding great. I'm excited to sit down myself and get to read through it, Jeb. And the final thing I'm going to ask you, we don't want to give it all away. We want folks to purchase copies of it and to get to read it for themselves. But the one that sticks out to me the most is chapter 10, The Old Times Are Gone with the Wind. Yeah. So explain that one a little bit.
That real quick is kind of looking at the South as the last of traditional Christian society. And I'm, again, not to promote my next book, but I'm going to expand on that some more. Yeah. But it really, what I'm looking at is the Old South is kind of this form of medieval Christendom in a way. And a lot of the traditions, what we think of the traditional West, that carried on, they lived out and they survived in the South. And it was kind of the antithesis to modernity. And the North was really that representative of modern culture that had become modern and industrialized and materialism and capitalism and so on. And the Old South is kind of that close-knit family kinship, agrarian community that's devoutly Christian, very libertarian politically in the wide sense. And that sort of society, which I believe is really based on Christianity and not secularism, kind of died out. And I think that the Old South, when it's gone with the wind, it's really the end of Western civilization as it transpired, as it was kind of emerged and then spread from medieval Europe and maintained in the Old South, even though there's slight aspects still around today. A real culture built on kind of that close-knit, diverse or decentralized, close-knit community kinship in the church kind of was eradicated by the war.
And that's, I'm glad you say that. That's something, and being we're so many years, 160 years removed from this era, that's something we all talk about, not in just the SCV, but in my local area. In some way, we wanted to experience what the Old South was like, and not necessarily the slavery aspect of it, but you see, like the Gone with the Wind movie, how it's portrayed. We want to experience that. We want some of that. That's something we want in our society, where things were peaceful. It was a Christian-based society. There were good people. Was there faults there? I'm sure there were, but we all want that. We all dream for that.
I agree. And one thing I think we see is somewhat of a unity. You know, modernity has class warfare, Marxism, where everyone's against each other. In the Middle Ages, Thomas Aquinas said we're a united whole. And the decentralization to have throughout these states, these kind of united whole of kinship and like-minded communities that were self-governing, that had the politics they wanted without a distant majority forcing their way. So you have all these kind of little unified wholes of culture and community together, that, like Little House on the Prairie, I love that show. It's one of my favorite. That kind of presents the same sort of thing. And if you watch that show throughout the seasons, you almost see how modernity in the North's victory of the Civil War kind of started to transform the West as well. While I did it in the South, you could still kind of escape a lot of it and live out in the West, but then that transformed over there as well. And so that whole community, the fabric of it, the beauty of it and the community of it was ripped apart by the war and destroyed.
What's the saying, Jeb, when people retire up north, where do they move to? They move down south.
Yeah, it's usually Florida. I mean, the town I live in, half the residents go to Florida, and so yeah. And then you guys are right. You're like, hey, if the South is so bad, why do you keep coming?
Yeah, why do you keep coming down here? What do you know? Yeah.
They really do. I can't understand that, why they do that.
Well, Jeb Smith has been our guest tonight. He's an author and historian. The book is Defending Dixie's Land, What Every American Should Know About the South and the Civil War. That is not your only book, Jeb. As we wrap up tonight, let's kind of mention your two other books, and then we'll talk a little bit about your website here too, and how they can pick up a copy of Defending Dixie's Land or your other two books as well.
Thank you. Yeah. So my other books are Defending the Middle Ages, little known truths about the Crusade, Inquisition, medieval women, and more. And that's available on Amazon or Sensus Fidelium Press. And same with Missing Monarchy, correcting misconceptions about the Middle Ages, medieval kingship, democracy, and liberty. Also available on Amazon and Sensus Fidelium Press as well. And then, of course, Defending Dixie's Land is available on shotwellpublishing.com. or Amazon. And my website is authorjebsmith.com. It just went live two days ago, so it's brand new. Still working on a few minor adjustments, but there it is. And Missing Monarchy, you'll figure out, you'll make a lot of connections to the Old South and the political systems. That what I'm arguing in that book is that the early and high Middle Ages were very decentralized, very libertarian. It was the 14th century that transformed it into monarchies, kind of changed the whole situation, and it went downhill from there. But there's a lot of connections between the early, kind of the Anglo-Saxon England and the Old South.
Well, the website is authorjebsmith.com. You can go learn, pick you up a copy of Defending Dixie's Land and the other books as well, and learn more about him tonight. We appreciate him being a guest on the program. And Jeb, as we say our goodbyes tonight, you're not done writing. You've got more books coming out you're working on in the future.
I do, yeah. I have one focused solely on the causes of Southern secession, and that I'm going to submit to Shotwell this month, hopefully they'll accept it. And then I have another book on military aspects, kind of looking at misconceptions about military aspects of the war. And like, I'm going to argue that George B. McClellan is the most underrated general of the war for political reasons, because he ran against Lincoln and so on. I'm going to argue that Grant and Sherman especially is the most overrated general of the war. I'm also going to critique Robert E. Lee, as great as he was, but I'm arguing that Stonewall Jackson was the best general of the war. Other subjects are that the Gettysburg campaign, I don't think it was the major defeat that it's presented as. I don't think it was the last chance for the South to win at all. I don't think they got their butts kicked throughout the whole campaign. They immediately went on the offensive in Tennessee, sending Longstreet with 2 divisions, which is not what you do if you just got your butt kicked in Pennsylvania and so on, and just other subjects like that. I have a bit on Nathan Bedford Forrest as well.
Oh, that's going to be good with some great things coming in the future. Again, Jeb, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Know the door is always open anytime you want to come on with us, and we're glad to have you a member in the SCV and the Tennessee Division.
Awesome. Thank you for having me on.
All right, Jeb.